the commitment to service of our community and our quality of life, which goes no further, well, starts at the school system, really, and so whatever we can do to partner, and I appreciate the joint meeting we had a few weeks ago, or a month or whatever it was ago, joint meeting between the Board of Education, the Board of County Commissioners, maybe I was the only one there, and the Board of Legislators, but that was a really well-performed, well-done meeting, regardless of what I say about Mr. Burke, but that's okay. He did a great job. It just gives me opportunity to mess with Mr. Burke. Where is he? There you are. Okay.
Statute of limitations is up.
I don't know. I got a couple more digs in there. So again, thank you for attending. We will do this to quality. It's at 1 p.m. I do know you have a closed session at 3, so that gives us about an hour and 57 minutes to complete this. But with that, why don't we start with any opening comments?
Yes,
Madam
I do.
President or Superintendent?
Yes. On behalf of the board, I would like to thank the commissioners for hosting this meeting today. I know we all have very busy schedules, but it is really important for both of our boards to come together to discuss the issues we are facing. From our conversations we have been having, and I know Ms. McCabe has been talking with Ted, like I think at least 4 occasions with his team and our team. I'm very optimistic that we can build and maintain a very successful working relationship. I think the key to this is making sure that we have open communication with each other. And we look forward to many more productive meetings, and we need to keep these quarterly meetings.
Okay, absolutely.
And I would just
Yep,
add
please.
to what President Herbert said, that today we mainly want to focus on the impact that we're seeing under the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. The Blueprint is changing the way our funding works. It's changing the work of our school system as we implement the policy aspects, and there is a capital impact. There is only ever so much time for the discussion, and as it's budget season, today we'll mainly focus on the funding aspects, but we certainly would be glad to reference and discuss all aspects. We wanted to spend some time with you, as we had previously done with the delegation, to provide an overview of how education funding now works under the Blueprint, and what we see that will mean for us, for you, and for our schools. From there, we will share what is in my proposed budget to the board, which is largely driven by the Blueprint implications and what that means in terms of a budget request to you. Lastly today, just as a brief update, we wanted to share what we now see as a timeline for the feasibility studies that grew out of the work of the Southern Area Redistricting Committee. We have a presentation and a couple of additional handouts that are in your packets. I'd propose that Mr. O'Neill begin to work us through the presentation, and I'll ask him to move through the Blueprint material as quickly as possible so that the two boards can have ample time for discussion. And we also want to be sure that we answer all of your questions.
That sounds good. Are there any other opening comments board members would like to make at this time?
Ms. Herbert, do you mind if I say something real quickly?
Of course.
I just want to thank you guys for having this meeting. I know we established the joint meeting of the commissioners and the Board of Ed on a quarterly basis several years ago. Of course, the pandemic in the middle of it wreaked a little havoc on everybody's schedules, but I really appreciate you guys having the commitment to keeping up this process and this level of communication, because I think that we've got some challenging times ahead, and the only way that we're going to get through this is by open and continuous communication. So I really just appreciate all of your openness and willingness to keep this level of communication going on a regular basis going forward. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, prior to Mr. O'Neill, without further ado, what I'd like to do is take a look at the minutes from May 10th, 2022 for review. Any changes or discussion need to be made on them? If so, make them now. If not, get a motion to approve, second, and move on.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, I got a motion, I got a second. Any other further, or any discussion? Seeing here none, all in favor? Aye.
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 Okay, opposed? Got it. Mr. O'Neill, I think you are up.
Thank you, and good afternoon to both boards. Just to go back over what Ms. McCabe said briefly, you, in addition to your agenda in the minutes, you have essentially 3 documents in your packet. I believe you should have a PowerPoint slide set, and that's a collection of slides that were provided to the delegation meeting, and then additionally, there are some slides from the Board of Ed's budget work session in December where the superintendent sort of laid out what will be her proposed budget to the Board of Ed that she'll deliver later this afternoon. And then behind that, you should have 2 one-page handouts, or at least they're printed on one page. One might be front and back. In one of our meetings with Mr. Zaleski and his team, he challenged the superintendent to see if it was possible to sort of come up with a visual that might help on a basic level of understanding how funding shifts from before the blueprint to after the blueprint. We'll reference that in a bit, but that's there. And then the superintendent came up with one page front and back of discussion points for the delegation members following our meeting with them, and so you have those discussion points as well for your reference. The good news is we are not going to go through all of these slides. We're going to jump around a lot, but we wanted you to have them for reference, even for discussion or question and answer today. And if you look really carefully and squint and avoid the glare, you can see that the slides themselves are numbered, so I'll let you know where we're moving to and from, and it'll also be on the screen, assuming I can
Okay.
can click here. But at the beginning, we're going to start at the beginning for about 2 slides. And, the superintendent said we want to try to focus in on funding today, even though policies tied to funding and funding phases in over time, looking at what the blueprint means in the long term and the mandates that are coming right now. Largely, her proposed budget's built on that. We're gonna do our best to try to explain all of those moving parts of blueprint funding and do our best to answer all of your questions. So the blueprint law grew out of the Kirwan Commission, as you know, and the funding aspect of the policy followed the law into the General Assembly, and the blueprint funding formula became effective with the current fiscal year. So fiscal year 23, the year we're sitting in. So we are already receiving funding under the blueprint formula. It changes the Thornton formula, which is the formula that existed following the Bridge to Excellence Commission, or the Alvin Thornton Commission, and that had been in place from roughly 2001 until now. And it works similarly in that we receive funds through a formula, and the formula contains what the state refers to as program areas, so a certain amount of money based on this educational program and a certain amount of money based on others, and we will display those and talk about those. But it is a little bit different in how the funding is restricted or no longer unrestricted as it was under the formula. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. The formula phases in over 10 full years, at least in the initial legislation, and much like the Thornton formula, the money we receive under the blueprint formula is wealth equalized, and we'll discuss that throughout, but essentially the state approaches public education and public education funding from what they consider an adequacy perspective and then an equity perspective. And for them, for funding, equity means that funding is adjusted for relative wealth. So they rank the 24 jurisdictions by the equation they use for wealth, which is, it's a little more complex than this, but it's essentially your property tax income and your income tax, local income tax, divided by your student population, and then they rank the 24 counties, and funding is adjusted based on the relativity of that wealth. This is loose, and I understand that, but in general, think of that as more like a 60-40 split. It works out approximately there in most cases for us, meaning you funding 60% of public education in Carroll County and the state funding 40. And that's going to become especially true when we do look at the formula here in a minute, because the formula defines what they call shares, a state share and a local share. So the third slide, and it's on the screen
John,
now.
out of the 24, where did we rank?
We rank 10th in the aggregate, so they add up. Like I said, it's a little more complex than that. They look at targeted populations of students as well. But we rank 10th. And Commissioner, that's been fairly consistent in all the years that I've been here. I would say in most of the years I worked here, we've been 10th, maybe
Yep.
9th sometimes, maybe even 11th here or there, but we generally fall out about 10th.
Okay.
And that, there might be some room for movement as our enrollment is rising again, but it won't be significant
Right.
enough to move that needle very far. This slide, or the third slide in your packet, is the big difference between the Thornton formula and the new Blueprint formula. The law makes us accountable for funding, specifically for expenditures. And we have to spend 100% of the funds we receive in each of the program areas. And again, we will display these in a minute, within the program that the funding is specific to or applied to. And then we also have to spend 75% of the funds at the school level. And in some cases, that, one example that helps explain that is there are program areas or columns in the funding spreadsheet that address funding for specific types of students, special education students, English learners, compensatory education students, which refers to the number of students we have who are eligible for free and reduced meals. We have to spend the money in the program, and we have to spend 75% of the money at the school. So roughly, in the case of some of those targeted areas, you would say, okay, where are the farm students located within Carroll County's public schools? The state is asking us eventually to prove that we're spending that compensatory ed money at those schools, or where the students exist. And that level of accountability is very different than how funding has worked in the past. Under Thornton, even though there was a formula, so there were columns on a spreadsheet that added up to eventually your total state aid, those funds were unrestricted. So traditionally, the Board of Ed, at least since 2001 and really before, has been able to sort of approach its budget the way I think most people would think local governance works. The Board of Ed gets from folks like us what we project next year's revenues to be, state and local, and then the Board of Ed has a series of priorities, staffing needs, facilities needs, compensation needs, and so forth and so on, and you try to match those needs with the projected revenue, define what you think your number 1, 2, 3, whatever priority would be, until you sort of run out of money and make those hard decisions. Under the Thornton formula, that worked. Under the Blueprint formula, ultimately that will not work, and we'll try to get into that when we put the numbers on the screens. And then two other ways that the Blueprint's a little bit different than what we're used to in the past is there's a couple of instances, and they're listed here, and we'll jump to them in a second, where the Board of Ed basically becomes for lack of a more sophisticated term, sort of a pass-through funding agency. So there are certain programs, dual enrollment, or really it's more than dual enrollment, it's post-college career pathways, where we receive money under the formula, but then we have to send that money to other agencies, and in our case, that's Carroll Community College. And then there's a career counseling program requirement under the Blueprint for students in grades 6 through 12, where we have to work with, at least in the first 3 years of the Blueprint phase-in, with the local workforce development board to develop a career counseling program for students in 6 through 12, and we need to earmark a certain amount of money per student that comes in to that program. And so some of the details on that are a little, I should say they're evolving in terms of guidance from the state. So, that may be a scenario where we send money to local workforce development and they sort of grant it back to us to accomplish certain things. There's an MOU that has to be established that's in the works, but it's nowhere, it's not like completion is right around, next week. So some of those details are to be ironed out, but I think the big takeaway is we need to earmark that money and set it aside for that purpose.
Will we have the
However,
opportunity to tell our own story when it comes to both the funds for the community college and workforce development, and then give it to the state saying this is what the best solution looks like for Carroll Countyans? Or is the state going to direct us in saying this money must go here and then back?
Yeah, they've already said that the decision is made.
Right.
And, we've already paid $500,000 or more to Carroll Community for this year's dual enrollment.
Right.
And we project that next year we'll probably be paying, more than $1 million.
Right.
1.2, 1.5. And again, that's coming out of our budget.
the workforce development goes to workforce development, and then you said it could go back to the schools, or?
Perhaps, and I hate to sort of jump ahead of the conversation we're having with them, but, so that's a 3-year, it's a 3-year program. For 3 years, there has to be this arrangement with workforce development. Career counseling has to exist throughout the blueprint, but for the first
Okay.
year, there has to be this scenario where we earmark a certain amount of money per pupil and provide that to workforce development. Realistically, with a 3-year window, then I think it's legitimate to say there's questions like, if it requires staffing, does workforce development want to try to hire staffing to implement, knowing that in 3 years that ownership of that program could shift back to the school system, or does it make more sense for the school system to hire the staffing necessary to implement? And if that turned out to be the scenario, I guess in my mind, it loosely looks like there's the money we give to workforce development, but for that purpose, they may grant it back to us to hire the staffing to implement and things like that. There'd be other scenarios like maybe software licenses or technology where that money might go right to workforce development, and they would clearly purchase that themselves if that makes the most sense.
Yeah, I mean, how do we leverage the dollars best to be most effective and efficient for the kids?
Yeah.
Whether it's using workforce development underneath of, because we do have Workforce Development Council here in the county, the Governor's Workforce Development Board and Secretary of Labor, it may be more efficient to use that avenue than through the school system, but just that we're open to whatever makes most sense,
Sure.
so.
But in terms of the math, the numbers are specified in
Right.
in the
No, I got
formula.
that.
So-
Okay.
And I don't want to repeat the things the superintendent just said, but on the screen now, and I'm on slide 16, if you want to flip and follow that way. Here's
Can I
sort
ask,
of,
and maybe you're going to talk about this, you're skipping slides, the whole bit of the formula and how bought in they are to the development of the formula, and they're mandating stuff and telling you, you've got enough money to pay for it because of the formula. So some of the early questions, like for instance, community college, can we go back to them and say, maybe you didn't realize this is costing us $1 million. I think the answer is going to be, you've been given enough money to do that. If you need more, see local. And I don't know if you were going to touch on that some, but I think we need to.
I was in a couple slides, I can skip there first if you want.
No,
Okay,
just if
yeah.
you are.
Okay,
I'll
so
be
we'll,
you know I'm a patient person.
Keep control, John.
couple more comments on dual enrollment and then career counseling, and we'll be looking at the formula.
I apologize, yeah.
Oh, no, I just wanted to ask a clarification question. So you had said, is it possible, is there enough leeway there that if the best solution is for us to work with career counseling and the workforce, and that they could gift the money back to the school system, if that's the best solution for us, is that allowable under the current?
I believe so,
Okay.
in the sense that I haven't seen any definitive guidance from the state that precludes that or says that's not allowable.
Correct.
Okay.
Our issue would be with this is that we have had and we still have priorities in our school system. And if given the latitude, that would not be a place where we would spend over $1 million next year or the year after. We have pressing issues in the school system. And while I agree in theory to that it's good for kids, it wouldn't be how we would choose to spend that money.
Right, and we can't hold outside entities accountable,
Correct.
right? We're gonna be sending money to them for these purposes, but we have no authority to hold them accountable for those results, whereas what if we contain it within the school system, we would have that.
Right.
Right, and, yeah, and so it also, the law requires a memorandum of understanding between the entities, so that'll come eventually to the Board of Ed. The county is not part of that MOU, the Workforce Development Board is, the Board of Ed is, and the community college has a piece in that as well. Another reason why I think there would have to be some realistic flexibility, Mrs. Savigny, is because, to my knowledge, at least based on my past professional experiences, we're blessed to have a local workforce development board in Carroll. Not every county does. In many cases, they're
Right.
regional. Even, like when I worked in Hartford, and this may be different now, as large as Hartford County is, it was a regional workforce development board with Cecil County, and on the shore, it might be a collection of counties and perhaps in the western part of the state. So to say, I don't understand how in those scenarios, a workforce development board of 5 counties could possibly handle that type of workload without there being the opportunity to sort of say, this MOU says the Board of Ed will still handle that, but we'll have a joint agreement on it. So that's what I would assume.
Okay.
Dual enrollment at the college, the one thing I'll add to what the superintendent said is, this is a today fiscal surprise. We weren't necessarily expecting this in fiscal '23, so this isn't a next year budget item, this is a this year budget item. And the law, the formula defines how much money per student rolls into this program, and it basically, what the law gets at is that students or parents can't be charged for dual enrollment. So it sets up a structure where we used to pay a small percentage of dual enrollment as the Board of Ed. Now we pay 75% of the college's tuition, and beginning next year, so the fees take place next year at fiscal '24. So this year, 75% of tuition, next year, 75% of tuition and all fees, and parents can't be charged at all. And all of this sort of ties some level policy and theory together, but career counseling leading to college and career ready, loosely what the law says is that by 10th grade, all students have to be college and career ready or else remediated to become college and career ready. And at the time they're college and career ready, they need a post-CCR pathway. And that could be dual enrollment, that could be a menu of other things. I think for us, it's most likely going to be a collection of advanced placement courses because we already have an advanced placement program. And for career and tech or CTE students, a program of industry-specific certification programs as well. So they're most likely for us, that'll be with the college as well, and there'll be costs associated with that. Some of those costs are much higher than what you would think of as traditional academic courses. I think Dr. Ball, to his defense, would say, I'm still eating 25% of tuition, but some days when I daydream, I think I might rather be him than me on this equation. But it changes. This is one of those situations that I view as unfortunate in that it changes. In some ways, it perhaps creates a little tension between entities where there wasn't any tension.
That's
But
true.
it also causes us to have to reflect on where we are with dual enrollment now. It already exists, and it's good for kids, I think, and your own parents, and it's successful, but we're kind of in a phase where we're sort of pulling back to say, we need to get a better handle on this and understand exactly what this means before we move forward again, and I think there's some tension there, so that's
And I'm sure Dr. Ball would love to see the number increase.
I'm sure they
Oh,
would,
yes.
and as
Yeah.
a parent, so would I.
Yeah,
But
yes.
as somebody, Cindy's saying, put this budget together, there are concerns here.
Plus, I'm just thinking too, for 10th graders to know what their path is going to be at that stage of the game. I mean, we probably have to do some things, academically and throughout the school system to make sure that, kids can have a good idea by that point. Because I'm sure at this time, not all 10th graders know what their path is
Right.
going to look like.
Does this tie at all into gifted and talented programs, or no?
No,
It's not,
Directly, no.
no.
okay,
Not at all.
okay. So middle school gifted and talented do not have the eligibility to go to the community college, or?
Correct.
Okay, okay,
No, the answer is no,
Yeah,
except, so if you
okay.
put career counseling with it, essentially, every student beginning in grade 6 would have, for lack of, there's an official term, but sort of like a career plan,
right,
building to the point where you become college and career ready in 10th grade, and then you would know, okay, I'm looking at a future where I want to take a collection of advanced placement courses, or I'm looking at a future where I might want to do dual enrollment at the community college, which is supposed to result in an associate's degree or 60 credits by the end of your high school career, or I want to move into a CTE realm and have licensure programs. That's sort of the build here. All of them are formula driven, so there's an earmark number for how we determine that amount of money for career counseling, just like there was for dual enrollment. Those numbers graduate, by the way, as the formula increases over time at the base per pupil. You're seeing 23 numbers on the screen, but those numbers increase over time. And when we get to the restrictions, which is, I think, where Mr. Kyler's trying to get me, That matters especially because you have to spend the program money in the program, and you have to spend the program money mostly at the school level. So it's not as if the board has the flexibility to say, well, we could save some here and do something there. And so this is sort of where now, and especially in the future, the rubber meets the road. The formula has the restrictions, and we'll keep hitting those. The formula sets up shares. And what you're looking at now, which is slide 18, or 19, I'm sorry, yes, 18 is numbered, it's kind of covered up by this slide, but this is slide 19. These are real numbers. This is our fiscal '23 blueprint formula actual on the screen. So this is the formula for this year. The restrictions are looming. They're not yet quite, we're not being held fully accountable yet. We'll talk about how we get there. But these columns on this spreadsheet, which is sort of broken in half so that you can see all of it on one screen, are what I'm referring to as program areas. So each thing with a heading is a program area. And each program area has a state share and a local share defined in the statute. And so for most of them, except for transportation, and I'm not sure why, but except for transportation, the blueprint law, the formula itself is defining how much the state's going to give us, and the numbers you see for the state are the full numbers. That's how much aid we'll get from the state, or we are receiving from the state this year. At the local level, it defines the local share. And again, this is overly simplistic, but it's wealth equalized, to go back to that. So it's going to be roughly a 60-40 split in many cases. The shares at the local level are different from MOE. And I know at some of the meetings I go to statewide, sometimes you'll hear MOE has gone away, maintenance of effort has gone away. It has not, in my opinion. What the blueprint says about maintenance of effort is there is still maintenance of effort, which was slightly adjusted again last year, but there is still maintenance of effort, and there's the local share under the blueprint. And the local funding authority, the county, is responsible for the higher of those two numbers. So you would still operate under maintenance of effort unless or until your total obligation under your local share requirements exceeds your maintenance of effort requirement, and then you would be responsible for paying the higher amount under the shares. I haven't spent a lot of time on this, like at the delegation meeting, hardly at all. Here, talking to Ted, we wanted to mention it, but you are so far above either that unless you wanted to sort of be, unless you wanted to move in a different direction than you've been moving with education funding, I'm not sure that either is really a topic of much conversation here. You are above maintenance of effort. You are well above local shares. And so here's another important point. When you look back to the Kerwin Commission and the fiscal and policy notes on the blueprint as it was becoming a law and became a law, they all showed 10-year charts, county by county, and said, does the county have, is there a required fiscal increase to each local? And for Carroll, you always had zeros, and you still have zeros. Because legally, you have no requirement to fund any more than you're already funding.
And so that's the part that doesn't make sense.
Does not.
To any of us, because we can't do what we need to do with the foundation funding. And the funding we get over and above foundation is all restricted to the blueprint policy areas. And so it leaves us making decisions like, do we have electricity and heat and air conditioning in our buildings, or do we add more services to English language learners, which is a position that no school system should be placed in.
So this is one of those scenarios where two things that seem incompatible are true, at least in my mind. One, you have no legal obligation to give us $1 more. Two, we can't implement the blueprint and keep Carroll County Public Schools open the way it exists today unless you do. And at some level, there will still be change. and I want to try to pull one of these program areas or one of these columns out and sort of tease that out and talk about it. And I'm going to go for the low-hanging fruit because it's the biggest number, but it's also in many ways the easiest example. Compensatory ed, which is the last column on the first row or first section. Again, that's the amount of money per pupil we receive for our students who are identified as eligible for free and reduced meals under the federal program. You can see their share plus your share adds up to about $26 million. As we move forward under the restriction that 100% of that money for each of those columns, but in this case, compensatory at 100% of that 26 million must be spent at the school level, or must be spent in the program, and 75% of the dollars in that program have to be spent at the school level. That is going to transform how our school system resources, which largely would be staffing, I think, but how our resources are aligned. Because we have no way around those accountability requirements. And so the way I think about that, for better or worse, I'll look to Mr. Kyler for a better, more understandable example. If you add all those numbers up today, minus any federal grant funding we receive, we're operating on about 372 million unrestricted dollars. Now, there's only 279 million there because your shares do not meet your full funding or your MOE requirement. So all of that money that you see on the screen, plus almost 100 million more, is being spent today to run Carroll County Public Schools as it exists today. But if tomorrow we have to spend $26 million differently than we spend it today, there's only two ways I can think of that she can do, that the superintendent can do that. One is, well, I guess maybe three. One is to cut, or it's the same thing either way, cut something somewhere to spend it where they're saying under the law we have to spend it. So that would mean something like, and I'm not trying to send off alarm bells, but we have to relook at our resources. 85% of our resources are human beings, or people delivering educational services. So we're gonna have to pull teachers or pull assistants or pull other service providers, counselors, behavior folks, whatever, out of certain schools and put them in a smaller subset of schools where our larger farms percentage of population students exist to meet the restriction requirement. And without offsetting funding from you at the local level, that's going to mean things like, at best case, and I'm trying not to be alarmist, but at best case, the nice way to say it is there's going to be fewer resources than have previously existed in certain schools. And most likely there would have to be some impact on something like class size in order to meet this requirement. And the only way out of it would be, to whatever extent locally we could offset that impact.
And I'll just add to that, you know, as I speak to my colleagues, other superintendents in other districts, they are able to solve some of this issue by pulling funding or positions from other areas and moving them to schools that have more free and reduced meals students, more English language learner students, because they have more positions that aren't standing in front of students every day. And what I would say, the position that we're in right now is that we've had over a decade of cuts. And when I mean cuts to central office, cuts at the school level, to the point where we really do what we need to do every day on a shoestring. Most of our staff is in front of kids every single day. And so the blueprint has a compounding effect for us, because we don't have anything to pull from to make sure that we don't have anything to pull from outside of our schools in order to meet this requirement. So the fact that we've cut for over 10 years means that we don't have the ability to adapt under Blueprint the way some of our other school systems in the area have. They may be able to cut teacher specialists that don't stand in front of kids every day, central office positions that don't stand in front of kids every day. We don't have that because of our over a decade of cutting those things in order to meet our budget demands.
No, and I personally, I appreciate that because that is that's Carroll County. I mean, Carroll County government went through the same over the last dozen years. We're trying to right-size ourselves to provide the services that our community deserves. And I appreciate you using the word "us" because it is a total of us, to include us all at the table along with our legislators to come up with ideas. But I mean, push comes to shove. It's dollars, and it's dollars and risk. And where are we willing to accept the risk, either in the Board of Education and CCPS budget? Where are we willing to accept the risk within the overall county government budget that is going to either provide for the schools, which would potentially put risk at other projects across the county? We have not raised revenue in over a dozen years, our two largest being property and income tax revenue. Are we willing to accept risk by even associating additional revenue to meet these demands? And the input in order to make those decisions is not the five of us at a work session, but it's all of us. So getting your insight and your thoughts about where we're going to accept those risks. What are your thoughts about, increasing revenue is very important, because we can't do this alone. And it's going to be, this is 50% of the county's budget, give or take, that goes to our kids. It doesn't go to you, it goes to our kids, it goes to our lives, in the county. And I don't mean to be on a pulpit about this, but it's all about risk management, and where are we willing to own up to saying, yes, we're going to increase revenue, and this is how we're going to do it, because the demands for the schools, the demands for fire and EMS as that grows, and other things, and here are other services that we're going to just push off to the side. Your input is, and I say you collectively, I think is extremely valuable to say, yes, this is the amount we must have, and this is the way that we're going to achieve it, and we recommend you doing it this way, and we will back you up, as we come up with a holistic voice, one team, one fight, in saying this is how we're going to do it.
And I would just add, this comes at the blueprint comes to us at a really terrible time, because we're trying to recover from the pandemic.
Right.
So our students academically are not in a place that we feel anywhere comfortable about. And at the same time, we have a mental health crisis going on that affects our schools. We have more students in need of mental health and behavioral services than we have ever had in the past. And so that compounds these issues as well, because if we were setting our own priorities would be on more teachers, more specialists for the classroom, and more mental health and behavioral professionals in our schools to support our teachers. So this really comes at a very, very difficult time.
And it is, and I think your comments on other jurisdictions, COVID reinforced that. You guys had central office staff teaching classes, because that's how you had to do it. And the other thing disturbs me about Kerwin and now Blueprint, all during the process of Kerwin, all that got emphasized, educators were going to make more money, educators were going to have a better job description, more planning time, and it just seems to me, as you watch Blueprint being implemented, I don't know how you can afford to do any of that for the educators that this was all supposed to benefit. And I think, again, which there's nothing we can do about it, we're being punished by some of the other counties. Some of the other counties had more money, and great. Some of the other counties have more problems, and so be it. And it just seems like Carroll County's punished because we don't have low-performing schools. We don't have some of the issues, but that should be rewarded. And then to the budget, and I was gonna say this closer to the end, but from this side of the table, well, from that side of the table, I would always hear, they're asking for more money, because this side talked that side into doing the 1 year plus 5 years, and that's great, and you gotta predict, and it's a great tool, but when inflation changes, when conditions changes, when requirements change, when you look at other jurisdictions that are given 8 to 10% pay increases, to say, well, you bought into 3% more than last year, and that's the way it goes. And I think, and I haven't done a budget process on this side of the table, but we've seen that with the sheriff, we've seen that with other departments. Right now, we're seeing that with EMS and stuff. It's gonna be very hard to say, okay, this is what we planned for this year, and that be the starting point. With many of the groups we're funding, that's not a good starting point anymore. And that's gonna be interesting from our side of the fence, and I think exactly what you said, the more facts you can give, the better. And then the other thing that's always concerned me when I was on that side of the table is the time frame. Well, here you're telling us how much money you want, you haven't negotiated yet. Well, as a farmer, you spend $300,000 in corn and fertilizer, not knowing if it's gonna rain or not rain. As construction, we traditionally gave raises in March and April. We didn't know how good the year was gonna be. We hoped we did. So I think that the time frame, maybe we all need to better understand it, but that's life in the real world. So this is your dilemma. The timing, as you just said, is horrible. From our side of the fence, developing EMS and doing other things that's been done, it's a horrible time from our side, but where we are is where we are.
And I will add to that, Mr. Kyler, since you were on both sides of the track here, we're not getting the number one employee that we want now. We are getting second and third choice, which has really made an impact on employment here with the educators. They are going elsewhere with that 8%.
Which has always been what I considered a disingenuous talking point, but it may now be true.
And I will say that, yes,
May
and you
now
are
be
correct
true.
on that, because people came to Carroll County for other reasons. But now, unfortunately, the tide has changed, and we are not getting that number one choice anymore. We are getting second and third choice, and that does make a big difference in the classroom.
Well, the problem is that in the past, the pool was large enough, the pool of teachers and assistants and others was large enough that we got top candidates, Howard County got top candidates, Anne Arundel, and so on and so on. But as the pool shrinks, we are truly competing with our surrounding counties for every teacher candidate, especially.
And the other thing Kerwin, I always thought was going to do was probably increase requirements on teacher education, but also increase the numbers, get more people into it, and help with the pool, and it's just the opposite's happening.
Concluding thoughts before the superintendent kind of forecasts her proposed budget here. The example with Comp Ed applies to English learners, special ed, TSI, or transitional supplemental instruction, and pre-K as well. Those are much smaller numbers in the grand scheme of things. Special ed's not, but we spend more than that in special ed anyway, so that's not a concern. So compensatory ed is the big issue, and then I think leading into Superintendent McCabe's discussion of her budget, the example we just worked through, that says nothing about, that example is how we're operating today and moving $26 million. It doesn't talk about other priorities or needs or mandated things under the blueprint. So this compounds. There's an issue on the accountability end of things, and then that gets worse when you talk about, well, what does the school system need to move forward in terms of needs, compensation, collective bargaining, you name it, and so all of this adds up. And I do think, one thing I'm grateful for in these sessions and in the delegation meeting is at least we're beginning to have this conversation out loud so that the community can hear this. Because the last thing I would think any of us want is for it to be a huge surprise whenever we feel whatever pain comes with this.
And Mr. O'Neill, if I can make an additional point about that, I think it is very important that the community understand what we're talking about here. Because we all had some aha moments at that delegation meeting where it's, okay, I understand the 26 million, having to pull it out of the foundation and spend it somewhere very specifically. How that manifests itself is something like, in certain areas of the county now, class sizes are going to be 45. So that we can achieve class sizes of 16 in other areas, right? So I would think that the community is, they're going to be very, once they understand the implications, that there's going to be significant concern, right?
Absolutely. Our parents are going to be very concerned, as are our students and everyone, that we will have schools that have class sizes so large, I don't even know how they're going to be able to fit in some of our classrooms. And then we'll have other classes that are very small in certain schools. And again, that the reason we have to do it that way is that we don't have anything else that we can cut, because we've cut for so long, that we can't make a cut somewhere else in order to just add resources to the schools we need to add resources to due to the blueprint.
Yeah, having the willingness to get up here and be very candid about this. It's not about becoming friends with anybody, and it's not about politics. It's about resource management. How are we spending the time, people, and money to get the best quality of life for our kids? And it is very difficult. We are, and it comes down to expenses and revenue. And the decisions we made over the last few years in the budget cycles that we've created were the best decisions that we made with the information we had at the time. We have a balanced budget for this fiscal year and next fiscal year, but you start looking at the out years, it becomes very challenging. People try to make that into a political, well, I'm going to balance this or that. We are balanced. That we are. The question is, what risk are we willing to take to keep ourselves in balance by law? And in order to do that, we either have to take away services for ongoing money, that's either in the county or in the schools, or we're going to have to build revenue. And that's either by growing and building, on properties that people sometimes don't want it built in areas, or it's looking at taxes. I was very reluctant, same with my colleagues, especially over COVID, to even touch or think about revenue. But we're in a position now that we've got to come up with a conclusion that makes sense. And it's got to be a very collective voice saying this is what we need to do. We're not going to go backwards with fire EMS. We're going to do it right, by law. That was in 2018. We were directed to do this by law. So there are things and this is, by law, what we must do. I'm not coming up with much answers right now, but I'm recognizing the problem. And the problem is that we don't have enough dollars to meet the demands, that are put in front of you. Because you're right. Those classes will not fit 45 people in the class, nor do our kids deserve that.
Nor will we have teachers stick around for very long.
Correct.
And Commissioner
Mrs.
Rothstein, I
Savigny.
think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, Mrs. Savigny, the public needs to hear all this, and you guys said it, 85% staff. Of the 15 left, some of that's ongoing money. We're not talking one-time money here. We're not talking smacking a Band-Aid on
correct.
this and moving. We're talking about every year moving forward.
Correct.
On
And
that
that's
note,
where I was going with that, was I think it's incumbent upon us to give you, the commissioners, the idea of like, okay, this is the 1 year predicament that we're in, but we really need a much longer term understanding, because Blueprint is not 1 year worth of a hit, right? It's a glide path over 10 years. You need a better understanding of, okay, not only does it mean this for next year, but it means it means X for this year, but it means Y and Z for the next 2 years after that, and then ongoing. So we need to size that whole for you guys so you understand. But it's also incumbent upon us to work every bit around the fringes that we can, to chip away at what we can account for as part of that 26 million, right? Like, so.
When will you?
I'm sorry. No, can you have,
Well,
please?
I was going to say, I'm piggybacking that. When will you know for sure that the state's happy with what you're chipping away at?
I'm not sure when we'll know in full. We'll know something roughly around March 16th. We submit our first local implementation plan to the state no later than March 15th, and that's largely the policy pieces, but at some point it all becomes one thing. So we'll know what their response is to where we're saying our kind of baseline as a school system is. I think a big unanswered question, and Mrs. Savigny might have just alluded to it, that I don't have an answer to, and I kind of wish if they were going to answer one thing, that this would be one of the top ones. The accountability under the statute becomes effective for sure in fiscal '25. We're already reporting monthly expenditures to them, and that's how we know, we have a pretty good feel as to what they're saying is qualifying in each of those program areas. And to Mrs. Savigny's point, we're working hard to try to maximize everything we can to qualify under compensatory ed, but we're not moving that needle too far yet. But what we don't know is, does that mean in fiscal '25, the state says, it's all due now, you're fully accountable today, and you're not there, so we're going to penalize Carroll County Board of Ed. We're going to withhold 25% of your next year's state aid.
The state has said loudly they're going to hold money if you don't do it.
Or would they let us smooth it in over some portion of the 10-year window of the blueprint? Because smoothing in 26 million over 10 years is a lot more acceptable to, I think, us and our communities than saying in fiscal year 25, all of those numbers better be how they were on that prior slide. And so that's a bit of an unanswered question on Superintendent McCabe's discussion points for the delegate that we provided to the delegation. She had sort of at the end had a summary of, what would be our number 1, 2, 3 asks. One of those is to push all that they can for an implementation timeline for the accountability, so that it doesn't all show up in one fiscal year.
And Mrs. Savigny, to the excellent point that you made, I was kind of curious, you had alluded to this as well. Obviously, what we spend 1 year is going to be a recurring expense and is going to increase over time. Do you guys have any idea or sense of what that's going to be over the course of time? And in addition to that, do you have any sense of what the student population projection is going to be over time in conjunction with this?
I would say yes to both, right? On the first one, we're trying to get our arms around that, right? Like, we have a better understanding of what the implications are from a financial perspective this year, less so in future years, but I think that we can at least put some numbers on the page that are at least directional.
But you know it's going to increase.
We know it's going to increase, yes.
Inflation isn't helping.
No, absolutely not.
I think we're going to have red and yellow cards maybe next time. No, I'm kidding.
What about student population? It is starting to grow again?
Yes, we're about 700 students up this year than we were last year, according to our September 30th
Right.
numbers. John, does it look like we have major growth coming?
It looks like we have steady growth coming, and he'll hate that I'm doing this, because we now produce our enrollment projections in May. We used to do them a bit earlier, but the State Department of Planning has pushed back for their own reasons. They pushed back when we can get some data from them that's needed. But looking at our enrollment, and it's not literally student by student, it's not, I'm not suggesting that, but more or less we've sort of recovered from the impact of the pandemic, the impact that the pandemic had on enrollment, and appear to be growing in addition to that. And so this is the part he's not going to like me to say, but our very talented facilities planner who works on the math behind our enrollment projections, just preliminarily, so I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but preliminarily, if you look at this year's numbers and next year's projections and rebuild his algorithm based on that. Over the 10-year window, it looks like we're on a path to get back to somewhere near our all-time peak of about 29,000 students.
Wow.
Which would be huge.
Yes.
That is good news.
Yes.
And it means a lot more state funding, but it also means, depending on who those students are, potentially a lot more restricted funding in some
That is true.
cases as well. So,
Depends on how we grow, right?
right.
But I think the good news story from that is the fact that we have recovered from the pandemic. We were on a downward trajectory of student enrollment for many, many years. It took us a while to kind of figure out where that was going to equalize, right? And then start its way back up. But that happened. It started happening before the pandemic. Then we took another hit from the pandemic. We lost about 700 students. Is that right?
Closer to 8.
Yeah.
And I would say with this second year of recovery, the 717 that the superintendent mentioned is the number. A portion of that is sort of students returning from homeschool, students returning from private school. And it looks like, I mean, all of this is very loose, and I know you know that, but it looks like maybe about 300 students a year going forward. And that's, you know, that considering where we've been from 2009-ish on, that's significant. That's, you know, that's not quite the historic growth rates of the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, but that's, you know, that's close.
Right, so having lost about 800 students prior to the pandemic, but we've gotten almost all of those back at this point.
We are, in the actuals this year, we are within 2 students of our last projection prior to the pandemic. So we are where we expected to be just before the pandemic, had it never happened.
You just want to pat yourself on the back on that number. So that's pretty impressive.
Well, I won't make John pat himself on the back. I'm going to pat John on the back.
That's pretty impressive.
I'm going to give the school system
Yeah.
props for, I think that we actually had a lot of families move to Carroll County because of the way that we conducted ourselves
Yeah.
during the pandemic and the way that we went about doing things.
Yeah.
And I think that's worthy of a pat on the back for all
No,
of
absolutely.
And I want to thank the two of you for the answers, because Mr. Kane and Ms. Savigny could spend about an hour and a half on this.
So, you know, and, yeah, trying to condense it all back down. We know what's been asked for the budget this year. You know, we're going to start going into our work sessions. What is the ask
So
at the
Yep.
end of it all?
We'll go into that right now. If you turn to page 29 in your packet, which is also displayed on the screen there, I'll be presenting the proposed budget this evening at our board meeting. And these are our asks without fully implementing the anticipated blueprint requirements and restrictions. But we'd also like to start to be a little bit proactive in what we know we're going to have to start doing. And the unfortunate reality for us is that we can't accomplish our system needs, let alone address the blueprint restrictions, without additional fiscal support from you. So my proposed budget is built on priorities that increase our request of you from the $6.7 million in the county's plan by an additional $6.7 million. And the slide on the screen summarizes the system needs that I've prioritized in my proposed budget. So the first issue that we just discussed briefly is inflationary impacts. And this just represents the cost of us doing business without making any improvements whatsoever. We expect 2.8 million in increases, even though we are seeing some successes, such as favorable healthcare rate increases. We still expect about 2.8 million in inflationary impacts. The blueprint mandates, that is $3 million. These items are mandated. They're already required by law for this year or become effective next year, so we don't have a choice but to do those. Transportation, $2.1 million. CCPS contracts pupil transportation with a group of independent local bus contractors, and we remunerate the bus contractors based on a transportation reimbursement formula that includes components such as the cost of the bus, driver and assistant pay, contractor business costs, et cetera. So the anticipated increase in that, for that formula is $2.1 million. Next on the list is substitute rate increases. That's $1.4 million, and this is truly, truly an urgent need for our system. At the State of the County, there was discussion about the challenges in the labor market with supply and demand and the increased cost of labor, and we're no different than any of the other businesses and organizations out there who see this every day. One area that it's urgent for us is that we are having difficulty having classroom coverage on a daily basis in our classrooms in our schools. And while we've recovered slightly from the worst place we were at during the pandemic with classroom coverage, we have not recovered to where we need to be. And unfortunately, our principals are spending significant portions of their day putting together coverage plans just for that day before the teachers or anyone can focus on teaching or learning. They're trying to just make sure that our students are supervised. Next on our list is staffing. This is $1.3 million, and there are a handful of positions that I've prioritized for which I believe we must allocate ongoing funding in FY24. There are 7 positions that the board prioritized 3 years ago as being so important that the board took the unprecedented action to forward fund for 3 years using board fund balance. And those positions we need to be incorporated into our operating budget. And those are an additional 2 custodian positions for our career in tech because we've increased our square footage there. Also, one of the bright spots for CCPS is that the progress we've had in our capital program in recent years. The state has stepped up to provide its share of funding on several projects, including the 2 large projects we have going on right now, which is the renovation of career and tech and the East Middle School replacement. And the good news is that the good and bad news is that we've exceeded our human capital to manage those funded projects. So we're asking for 1 additional project manager, when in the past we actually had 2. Next on our list, we've got our blueprint priorities, which includes employee salaries and negotiations. I'm proposing that the board approve $15.9 million for these combined priorities. And this is an area where we need to be somewhat careful as we discuss this publicly. By law, we must negotiate with our 5 unions on salary, hours, and working conditions. So we do not address specific parameters in public, but there are blueprint requirements on the very near horizon that we have to be proactive in addressing. And many of these mandates have some connection with employee workload. And just one example of that is there's a significant blueprint requirement that over time we have to move to a teacher career ladder that includes a mandate where teachers teach 60% of the time, and then 40% of their time is devoted to other professional duties. And the only way we can accomplish this, and the only way any system can accomplish this, is through additional staffing. So our best working estimate is to get to that 60-40 split, we're going to need 100 additional FTE to fully implement that. Realistically, we can't wait until the very end of the timeline to hire all of those needed people. As we know, we're all competing for people every single year. And for salary, without delving into any of the bargaining process, I want to stress the point that we are the largest employer in Carroll County. We're a very large organization, and we have about 2,200 teachers and roughly 3,500 total employees. And while the total figure sometimes will catch people off guard or by surprise, it costs us millions to give an adequate raise to our employees. For instance, the cost to award our eligible staff 1 annual step on their salary scales is $5.7 million, and every 1% raise costs us $2.5 million for just 1%. So we have the same pressures in the labor market that everybody's seeing, that the sheriff is seeing, that the community businesses are seeing, and we also need to be able to recruit and retain the best employees. So that's where we are with employee raises.
Ms. McKay, while you're on employees, what about recovery, tutoring, and all that? Are you covering that with current employees, but overtime, is that cost factored in this? And do you have any remaining federal COVID dollars funding any of that, or is that pretty much run out?
So right now, we're still able to use federal money to do the tutoring that's happening after school, our ELO. We still have federal money to do that with. And when that federal money is gone, we'll have to stop offering that program for our students.
And you mentioned earlier, based on test scores, et cetera, we haven't recovered.
We have not recovered to the point that we need to be at with our student achievement. So our students really lost a lot during that pandemic, as we would expect. But we haven't regained that lost growth as quickly as we would have wanted to.
Can I ask a question on the budget itself, the Board of Education's budget? What is in the unassigned operating budget right now?
What is in the unassigned operating?
Do you have funds that are unassigned at this time, like say for emergency, whatever operations?
We have
that you
fund
are-
balance
So how much is the fund balance right now?
right now.
Put it on the screen.
Yeah,
There you go.
I was going to say 12.
So it's 12.8 and it's 3.4%. At what is the kind of red line for risk associated with the fund balance?
We can't go below. 3.7. Yeah, 3.7, yeah.
So the fund balance exists via an MOU with you, and the range is 1% of the unrestricted budget up to a cap of 5. So we're in the sweet spot, and as you know, you've been here, annually we try to set some priorities with it. We try to stay away from ongoing costs, except for those 7 priority positions the board tagged a few years ago. We do things like pay for unanticipated year-end costs. We've been trying to help us with
Right.
capital infrastructure
Right.
and security and
And-
technology.
No, and I appreciate, and this is also not just for us, but also, like we said, for the community, again, getting this, these numbers, because they become complicated, So, but going back to that, you're asking for the 6.7 million. You could pull a significant amount out of that fund balance.
But
But
that's
this
one-time.
is
One-time
That's
money.
one-time
money.
That's
money.
one, so, okay,
We need ongoing money.
what, do you have ongoing, anything, or no?
Well, so in the grand scheme of the entire budget, it's not, we didn't highlight, we weren't going to highlight it here today, but since you asked, there's 2 areas where the superintendent is programming some fund balance in.
Uh-huh.
And what you could at least argue is ongoing. Diesel has been volatile. Diesel is one of the larger drivers in the transportation budget, and so we have to pick a number when we budget for the whole fiscal year as to what we think diesel will be. We're hopeful that the market will come back to it'll be higher than it's ever been, but we're hoping it's going to be, it'll stabilize lower than where we.
So hope is not the course of action, but what are the trends?
But what we're doing
With
is
diesel.
trying to smooth that increase. So
Okay.
rather than say we need to set the transportation budget based on $6 an hour on
Yeah.
diesel, we're
Yeah.
going to base it at 5 or 4 3/4, I think. And if we, and we're going to back the difference based on what the pump price said.
Right.
With fund balance for fiscal '24. And if prices adjust by next year, then the Board of Ed's fine. If prices don't adjust, then the Board of Ed's only on the hook for that, that $1 or so.
And you'll
per
use
gallon
one-time funds to do that?
And then we have some memorandum of understanding with one of our bargaining units where we've, in trying to preliminarily address some joint workload concerns, it's for pay, but it's for very specific extra duty pay for some staff. We're using fund balance to pay for that MOU, and then, again, all one time now, at
Sure.
the bottom
Right,
bullet, but periodically, and it's been a few years, I think 5 or 4 fiscal years, but we supplement our security infrastructure with fund balance, our technology infrastructure, and our maintenance infrastructure. So we have some preliminary plans with the superintendent by May to bring some numbers to the Board of Ed on that. And those are mostly not recurring costs that, diesel could be.
So potential, how much ongoing funds could be opened up?
Well, by policy, none.
None.
So like when we funded the positions, or you could make the case with diesel, the Board of Ed is knowingly making an exception to its fund balance policy, which says fund balance cannot be used for any ongoing costs. But difficult, challenging times call for, hard decisions.
Decisions, right.
We've made some of those decisions.
Absolutely.
the last couple of years.
And we've, historically used fund balance when we need something that is a one-time cost.
Yeah.
Whether it's technology or a piece of equipment in a school or something like that. But once we know it's ongoing, we can't use fund balance for that.
So then the other question is, if push comes to shove and there is zero available dollars that can be seen out of our budget, the county budget, what revenue would it take to get to $6.7 million ongoing funds? And that's what's revenue, do you have an idea about taxes? What it would take to get to $6.5 million ongoing?
If you look at property tax alone, that would be 3 cents, a little bit more than 3 cents. On income tax, we can go to 3.2, we're currently at 3.03, I think moving about halfway between them would get you there.
So I apologize, just because not at the mic, just income tax going from 3.03 to 3.2 would get us to that 6.7, and we're talking simplistic, very simplistic.
And a 3-cent raise in property.
Or a 3-cent raise in property taxes, simplistically looking at this.
That's or, right? Not
Or-
that
no,
you would have to
that
do
is
both
or.
of those.
That
Okay.
is or, to get us to that 6.7 roughly to meet these needs, while we're also looking at a budget deliberation and work session that we're going to go in. So just, for my colleagues, just to have those numbers in your head, and also for the community, to have those numbers in your head, knowing that those are numbers in order to meet the demands that the schools are saying that you need. It's as blunt as that. And we've got to be blunt,
And there's no extra in there at all. We are very minimalist on this budget, and we have been running this school board like this for years. So
But I
now
agree.
we've come to a point where
But look at it,
got mandates, and now it's really changed it.
look at the whole, it's we as collective. This county has, taken away 100 positions over years and still met services. And we were, really in a tough position, so now we're finally starting to hire back some significant needs. So that we is collective. The sheriff's department was in a world of hurt until we tied a knot at the end of the rope and let him climb back up to meet his needs. The fire and EMS was in a world of hurt where they were close to closing doors, at some of the services that they wouldn't be able to meet. And we collectively said, we're not going to allow that for the community. So we're doing this. So it's not one or the other. But that's kind of the position we're at. So I know there's a lot of priorities out there in the community. And I'm having another town hall next week, and we're going to be discussing some of this, I'm sure, because I'm hoping some folks will be listening to this. It's what are the priorities, and if there are children and the public school system, and to meet that 6.7 million, there's only so many ways we can look at where those dollars are going to come from,
If I
Sir?
could say, just to really underscore and add to what you're saying, if we were required to use our fund balance to meet this emergency issue and not get an additional funding from the commissioners, that would bring our fund balance down to 6.1 million, which is only 2.4 million above the minimum that we're supposed to have. And remember, that's one-time money. And what also concerns me is that, we have a recession looming. And if I could parrot what Governor-elect Moore said, he's resisting the notion to tap into the surplus because of this recession. And bringing our fund balance down to such a very low amount if we weren't to get additional funds would be very problematic and troubling for me as a Board of Education member. And then I'm also very concerned with the new administration, with the additional regulations and the additional requirements that we may see levied on our school system to meet equity standards and equity goals that he has set out in his agenda when he was running for office. So I think it's very important that the public understand exactly the funding predicament that the county is in. And again, I appreciate you stating "we," Commissioner, because it is true. It's a problem that we all have to work together to fix.
And we're going to be looking at, my colleagues and I, at what's budgeted, and, as Commissioner Guerin said very well the other day, he's going to turn over all the rocks he can to see where things are funded, where things are prioritized. And if it doesn't meet the demands of the community, then we should take a hard look at that and reallocate. But as we all know, there's only so much that's discretionary and a whole lot more that's non-discretionary. So, but that's where we're walking into, so.
And I think we have to worry whether it's the school system or EMS or the sheriff or Public Works. If we advocate using one-time money as a Band-Aid this year, and I almost said a bad word, what the world can we expect next year's budget to be like?
Right.
Because that would be a heck of a hole to come out of.
That would be a disaster.
And like I say, I don't care whether,
Right.
whatever side of that is for
Right.
looking at our budget.
And I think
That
it's,
scares
That's
me.
very true, Kenny.
and I think it's good for the community to kind of realize too, because I think we all have always heard, when my property taxes pay for, when my property taxes pay for. Initially, 50% of property tax is supposed to go towards the school system, or 50% of the budget. So I mean, if someone were to look at their property tax, and let's just say it's $3,000 a year, I mean, do they think $1,500 is going to scratch the surface from one household for beneficial for a school? It's not. I mean, that's not even covering even remotely a smidget of one teacher's salary, $1,500. So I think, if there has to be a discussion on your guys' end on raising property taxes, because you had just said, 3 cents, an actual dollar amount goes further than a percent, when it comes to the public thinking about it. So, let's just say it's $1 more. But I think those type of things looking forward, the community just needs to look at a little bit better, to have a little bit more understanding. Because, I'll be honest, gladly add $50 onto my property tax bill for more of the school system. I'm fine with that as a homeowner, but I know some other homeowners are not. So I definitely want the community to put things in perspective. I don't even know if there's a way on the property tax bill that the county could advocate to say, like, such and such percent of someone's property tax goes to whatever services. Is there a way that you guys can advocate for that, so maybe even the public can see it on their bill?
Well, I don't think that would be the need. I think it would be more, again, having these communications and getting out in front of this, having the ability to be empathetic to our county and our community and our neighbors, but also being very encouraged that we have a very educated community. That's important. It's, so having the ability to have these conversations, I am energized because of how energetic educated they are, and just getting in front of it. And also, that empathy goes a long ways, because you're right. I may be able to do something, somebody else may not, but
Right.
put myself in their shoes for a lot of things that are happening in their lives. I better be prepared. So, that's our role, as I see it up here, so.
And Commissioner Rothstein, if we can help with that, I know you said that you're going to be going out and doing town halls and trying to increase community awareness, and if it helps to take a Board of Ed member along to have some of those discussions, I think that we'd be happy to help out.
Well, I'm
with
having
that.
one on Tuesday, so anybody want to come? Steve's coming, so he'll be there.
But I also really appreciate your comments about the, the 3 cents or the, the increase to 3.2%, just so we kind of understand a magnitude of how that could potentially impact the community with those changes. I think it helps us understand. But I think it's also incumbent upon us, like, we don't want to look at this as just a one-year thing, right? Like, we're talking about 6.7 million for this year, but it's not a one-year situation. I think we really want to understand at least 3 to 5 years out of what we think the trajectory of this is, so that we can kind of solve it and plan for it now, rather than say, okay, let's just fix this coming year and then have to revisit it all again next year.
And that's a great point.
And whether or not we're going into a recession or not, I mean, part of my empathy, these same people that are paying property taxes have to fill their car up with gas. They have to pay their electric bill,
Right on
and
the
right
table.
now, I mean,
Right.
we just got a fuel for the furnace bill, and it's over double what we've ever seen before. And it's is that stuff temporary, or is that,
Right.
I hate the word, new normal?
And it's just very important for the public to understand that this issue before us today is not something that was created by people in this room. This is a mandate that was thrust upon our county from the Blueprint ballot initiative that was enacted into law a couple of years ago. And so I just don't want folks to think that this is something that we're kind of inventing and creating on our neighbors. But also understand that there are a lot of great things associated with this Blueprint initiative that's going to really help our community, raise teacher salaries, get our kids educated, prepare them for the future. So there's a lot of great things involved in Blueprint. But they're very costly, and they're issues that are thrust upon us. I personally would have preferred to, as John mentioned earlier, invite these things in at a slower pace, but we are where we are, and we're going to work together to get it done.
No, I appreciate it, Steve, and, going all the way back to my opening comment, there were 16 jurisdictions in the room, from all the larges to lots of the smalls, with the governor-elect. And only one person raised his hand, and it was only because he was on the committee. So 15 out of 16 had no input to what you're saying, so,
None of us on this side.
Right.
so just let you know, it's recognized. It doesn't mean it's going to slow down the momentum, but it is recognized. And, so,
And I think having spent so many years here in Carroll County Public Schools, I can say that, parents move their children here for safe neighborhoods and for quality schools, a quality school system and a quality education for their children. And as I've said, we're hanging on by a thread. And if the quality of our education decreases, we will all see a difference in our community as a whole that we don't want to see.
And I want to thank Commissioner Rothstein. He's now on the board of MACO. Of course, the rest of us were newly exposed to MACO, but in your board, with the ear of the new governor, you guys made the education part and Blueprint a priority to talk about.
absolutely.
And I want to thank you.
absolutely. So we have 5 minutes, I think 2:25 or somewhere around there, so allowing you to get back to your closed session at 3, recommend that we adjourn in just a couple minutes, maybe with some closing comments, if any of my colleagues may have.
I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming out today. I mean, I'm really looking forward to tackling this with all of you. I know you all have good hearts. I know you are all in the right place on this. And, as Commissioner Rothstein has previously said, we are one team here. This is not easy. This is not going to be a simple thing. And as has been mentioned, this is going to be an ongoing issue. But it's better to start looking at it now than have to deal with it after the fact or in the future. And I want to thank all of you for your willingness to be willing to take that on and to work with us to do that. So thank you.
Kenny?
And yes, thank you very much. And one request, I can't help myself. Because you guys have to get going, and I talk too much, can you send us like an email just giving us a quick update of the feasibility study and the redistricting?
Oh, yes, I forgot
Yeah,
about
I mean, I don't think we need to beat on that anymore. We've beat on enough stuff today, but
Yes, we
thank
will
you
send that.
guys, and it's interesting seeing you from this side of the table. But I've got to ask, who decided that I had to sit across from Mrs. Herbert?
Oh, well,
My eyes have been on you the whole time, sir,
we would-
and you're not gonna get that far away from me, I'll tell you that right now, because you need to be under control.
we were told when he came on this side, there's no givebacks, so, just saying, but,
Rhonda told us to go across.
Yes.
Rhonda said to do that.
No, I appreciate you all coming in today. It was discussed earlier, but obviously, I think the one thing moving forward with our board and yours now is that we consistently have those quarterly meetings. Communication is incredibly important. One thing, I think it was sort of mentioned, but we really didn't get into it, and I don't know where this stands right now. Have we heard any more on where the state is on our numbers? I know that's something we haven't heard for a while, and that was going to be pushed off, but is there anywhere as to where they are on the
You mean the
education? numbers?
academic
Yes, the
achievement
academic
data?
achievement, yes.
Trickling in.
Yeah, we don't have what we need yet.
Is there any
to-
idea when that might come out? Are we looking at maybe March, February, or is
They're
it
sa-
potentially later?
They're saying by the end of the month. Yeah.
Okay.
We're still waiting.
I was just curious, because I know we've all been, anticipating that and wondering.
Yeah, I won't say patiently waiting.
No,
We're
not
definitely not.
I said that facetiously, of course.
but, Donna?
Oh, I just want to say thank you, guys. I think that we want to get these meetings, I think, on the calendar. Like, we just want to make sure that we have them on a regular quarterly basis, and really appreciate your willingness to do that. And I also appreciate your creative thinking on the ex officio attendance at our board meetings on a monthly basis. I think it's a great idea to have it kind of on a rotational basis, so that all of you kind of, since we are 50% of, give or take of the county's budget, like there's some big challenges ahead of us. I think it makes sense that you're all kind of at least get a taste of things that are going on a regular basis, rather than it just
Commissioner
being one.
Gerwin had a conflict for today, but he will be with you guys tonight.
At 5,
And,
right.
Right.
hopefully, your new president can run a concise, short meeting.
I will.
They have been.
You're not there.
Since you're not there, they've been fast. Tara, any?
Just want to thank you again. I've always appreciated the quarterly meetings that we've had with the county commissioners, that, hopefully you guys do get an insight, and Mr. Kyler, I mean, you have the eyes of what was going on for 4 years, so, having you on the other side of the table is extremely beneficial, so you can kind of rein in the other ones, be like, wait a minute, let me explain this one. So I do appreciate that we have these opportunities and we continue them.
Thanks. Dr. Dorsey?
Well, again, thanks very much. It's a new year, a new opportunity for all of us, really. A new beginning, and thank you all for listening and hearing. Our school system is just a vital part of our community, and, I think it speaks very loudly where a community's values are when we look at what we do to help our children. So thank you all for listening, and I think we're all trying to grasp this, the whole idea of the blueprint and making it work for us, because we really do want the best for our children and for our community. So thanks for listening, thanks for hearing, and, I can go back to that old adage that, there really isn't anything that we can't solve
That's correct.
if we don't all, if we all work together. I almost put 2 negatives in there and it turned out.
All good.
But if we all work together, we can certainly, turn some of these challenges into opportunities.
Yep.
So, thank you.
Agree. And doctor to your left, Dr. Whistler?
Yeah, again, thank you so much for meeting with us. I will tell you that as the new kid on the block, so to speak, I have, for example, I'm torn into the transportation portion of the budget. We really are doing everything we can to present the leanest possible budget, and I really empathize with the position of the commissioners. We know you have so many departments, so many priorities to juggle. But I really appreciate the openness. I know each of you personally. I know you're all fiscal hawks as well. And I just think the county's in great hands. And we're going to work together no matter what the outcome is to make sure that our students and teachers and parents have the best education possible.
Okay. Ms. McCabe?
I would just say thank you for your partnership with us. I feel like we are really all in this together, and we will be able to provide what our students need, what our schools need. And I will just say, we do have the illustration in here. If you're dealing with the complex issue of the blueprint, we really tried to take a complex issue and make it as
Yeah.
simple as possible.
Yeah.
So thank you for your patience with us as we tried to describe the difference in that funding formula.
Patience and persistence goes a long ways. Madam President?
Thank you so much for having us. I know we will be contacting you to invite you over for the next quarterly meeting. I will tell you, it's going to be a really tough next several years in this budget with working us together with these mandates. This is not something that we all want, but we will have to work together and we will figure this out together. And that's the only way we can get anything accomplished within these next 5 years. It's going to be a tough road. And I'm so glad that we have talked about this openly so the community knows what we're up against and what you all are up against. And then we need to work collaboratively together to come to one to get this all straightened out. So
No.
thank you.
I appreciate it, and
Happy New Year to all of you.
absolutely. And again, the 3 E's, having the energy, recognizing that we have a very educated community, and always being empathetic to the community as these decisions are being made is critical. So formal meetings are great. Informal communications go a long ways. So anything else from anyone? Seeing here none, I need a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay, I appreciate that. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.